Hello again, my name's John and welcome to my latest video. This time I'm going to show you how I make a simple sandwich loaf that I've been making for years at work and at home. It's a wonderful soft bread ideal for sandwiches and toast. As a follow-up to this demonstration, I'll make a short video on how I make my favourite sandwich, the BLT, using the very bread I make in this video. I'll also go through a couple of interesting and useful facts, plus a little experiment on testing dried yeast. Also a quick demonstration on how to knead the dough by hand. Okay, let's start by weighing off 430 grams, that's 15.2 ounces of strong white bread flour. If you're not sure what strong flour is, take a look at the ingredients list on the side of the flour bag and choose a white flour with at least 12% protein, and that's the flour you need for making bread. Now to bakers, this bread is known as a 57% hydration. That simply means the percentage of water to flour, and this is how you can work it out for any amount of flour. Right, it's much more accurate to do this in grams, so enter in the calculator the amount of flour being used, in this case 430 grams. Now multiply that by 57%, that gives you the amount of water needed for this recipe. In this case 245 grams. Where this comes in very useful is if you go to your cupboard and see you only have 390 grams of flour, just do the calculation and here presto, this amount of flour needs 222 grams of water. Right, the recipe for our loaf is 430 grams of flour, multiply that by 57% hydration, equals 245 grams of water. Simple. Okay, I'll shut up for a while and quickly go through the rest of the ingredients you'll need to make this bread. There's also a full list of the ingredients at the start of the video. Right. Over the next couple of minutes I'd like to talk a little about yeast. I've had many comments, especially on my baguette video, of people wondering why their bread isn't rising like mine. Well, 9 times out of 10 it'll be the yeast, so I've set up a little experiment on where things could possibly go wrong. I have here 2 identical jugs with equal amounts of warm water and 2 tins of active dried yeast, both of which, as you can see, are in date as I'm doing this in November 17. The tin at the bottom of the screen has been open for about 3 months and the tin at the top of the screen has just been opened today, but I bought both of them at the same time approximately 4 months ago and they've been stored in the same place. Now I'll test both of them first by adding a little sugar to the water, but using separate spoons for adding the yeast to avoid any cross-contamination. I'll let the dried yeast rehydrate for 1 minute and then give them both a good stir and then see what happens over the next 10 minutes. But don't worry, I'll fast forward that bit. Even after only 2 minutes you can clearly see the top yeast is starting to activate, but there is nothing happening at all with the bottom one. Okay, so after 10 minutes it's pretty obvious that the yeast at the bottom is well and truly dead, and the top one is forming up beautifully. The point of my experiment is to never take for granted that your yeast is good, even when it shows on the base of the tin or packet that it's still in code or date. And it's always best to have the yeast prove itself before adding it to the flour, and that's the next step we need to do in making our loaf of bread. Right, back to making the bread. Add to the warm water approximately 40 Celsius, that's 104 Fahrenheit, the teaspoon of sugar, followed by 7 grams or a heaped teaspoon of active dried or instant dried yeast. If you're using fresh yeast, about 15 grams, which is half an ounce. And finally, the 20 grams or 1.5 tablespoons of vegetable or olive oil, and give that a good stir. Also, another little tip: never add the salt into the jug when proving the yeast. They are sworn enemies, and the salt always wins by killing off the yeast. Now leave that in a warm place to prove itself for about 5 minutes. I like to keep mine in a sink of warm water at the same temperature as the mixture. When the 5 minutes are up, whisk the salt thoroughly into the flour before adding the yeast mixture. Then bring the whole lot together. I'll be using my trusty wooden spoon handle to do this, and as I've said before many times, don't attempt this with a whisk. You'll get into a terrible sticky mess and you'll spend the next 5 minutes cleaning dough out of it. I speak from experience. If you've got a stand mixer, it makes all this a lot easier, as I'll show you a little later. But if I'm only making 1 or 2 loaves, I like to do it all by hand. Not only to save washing the mixer afterwards, or the 10-minute workout you get by hand kneading the dough, it's the touch and the sense of satisfaction you get when you see the end results, knowing you did it all by hand. Once it's loosely together, turn it out onto the workbench and start gently pulling it together with your hands. Now, while the bowl is empty, pour in about half a teaspoon of oil and rub it around the inside. This will stop the dough sticking during its first rise. The first part of the kneading process is to get the dough together into one lump. If you haven't already got one, may I suggest you invest in one of these scrapers. They really do make life a lot easier in the kitchen, especially in bread making. Now this is where a little experience comes into it. I can tell almost immediately that this dough is a little on the wet side, as it's slightly sticking to my hands and the bench. This is a common problem with the flour absorption rate, or even the atmosphere in your kitchen could cause it. You will know when you start to knead it. If this happens to you, all you need to do is literally add a pinch of flour, I'd say about a teaspoon, which is all I needed to add to this dough. It's very rare that the mix would be too dry. Okay, and that's that problem solved. That's all it needed, 1 teaspoon of flour. Right, let's talk a little about the kneading techniques. This first example is what I call the one-handed knead. I've slowed the video down so you can see how I do it. If you watch carefully, I push forward with my right hand, and at the end of the stroke I flip the dough 90 degrees with my left hand, and then fold the dough back over itself with my right hand, then start the motion over again. Right, now that the dough is ready to go, I'll set the timer for 10 minutes. That's how long it has to be kneaded for. Now with the timer set, it's time to do my double-handed kneading technique. I start by pushing the dough forward with the heel of both hands. At the end of this stroke, I flip the dough once again 90 degrees to the left. Then pull the dough back over itself and start the cycle again. This will only come with practice. There's lots of ways of kneading. You may want to develop your own technique, but this is how I've done it for many years, more years than I care to remember, and it works. I like to put on a couple of tunes with a good beat. It keeps your timing right, and it seems to make the clock go that little bit quicker. It is a good workout though. Well, that's it for the kneading, but it is a very important step in making this type of bread, as it ties and strengthens all the gluten strands together in the dough. Otherwise your bread would come out flat and tough instead of light and airy. Now, a much less strenuous way to make the dough is in a good stand mixer, and they don't come much better than a KitchenAid. All you do in this case is to add the water, yeast. I'm using 15 grams, that's about half an ounce of fresh yeast in this case, sugar and oil. Let it prove in the bowl, then add the flour and salt and let it go for 10 minutes. And you end up with the same result. So if you don't have a mixer, or yours breaks down, or you just fancy a workout, at least you'll know how to knead by hand. Either way, it's a good skill to learn. Whichever way you get to this point, it's time to get the dough into the lightly oiled bowl for its first rise. Place the dough in the bowl top side down to get a little oil on the top of it. Turn the dough right side up and cover the bowl for 30 minutes. I like to use a shower cap for this as it keeps the moisture locked in while it's proving. Make sure the bowl is in a nice warm spot and free from any drafts. For this loaf you'll need to prepare a 900 gram or 2 pound loaf tin for this recipe. I grease my tin with a small knob of butter at first, and then I add half a teaspoon of vegetable oil. You could also coat the tin in a dusting of flour, but I've had no trouble getting the cooked loaf out of the tin with just the butter and oil. Okay, 30 minutes is up and the dough should have at least doubled in size. Turn out the dough onto a board and knock it back to remove all the gas that's built up inside of it. Flatten and roughly roll the dough into a sausage shape and place it into the loaf tin as shown in the video. What you could do now is lightly dust the dough with a little flour, cover it with a clean, dry but light tea towel and leave it in a warm place for about 30 minutes to rise. However, I prefer to do it this way. I have a large airtight storage container where I pour a couple of teaspoons of water in to maintain a moist atmosphere, and this particular vessel has a grate so the loaf tin doesn't actually sit in the water. Then I place the whole lot in a sink of warm water for 30 minutes, with the lid just placed on but not fastened down, and a weight on the lid to stop it bobbing about in the water. And it works great. With about 10 minutes left to go on the dough rise, you'll need to preheat the oven to 170 Celsius, that's 340 Fahrenheit or gas mark 4. I'm setting mine to 160 because it's a fan assisted oven. Right, the bread should be well risen at this point. Don't let it rise any more than this, as it will carry on rising in the oven. And if it's over risen before you put it in, the bread will be in danger of falling over at the edges, looking like a huge mushroom in other words. All you need to do now is get it into the hot oven. Before you do, give it a sprinkle with a little flour. This gives the finished bread a more professional look. Right, once the bread is in the preheated oven, set your timer for 30 minutes and then wait for the beautiful aroma of fresh bread to start drifting through your house. After 20 minutes, carefully turn the tin around for even cooking. And there it is, one beautiful handmade loaf of bread. Now carefully take it out of the tin straight away and let it cool on a rack for at least 30 minutes before trying to cut it. If you can wait that long, that is. You may have to restrain yourself. Well, that's about it on making a simple sandwich loaf. It takes about 1 3/4 to 2 hours to make it, but that's mainly waiting time. The only physical work is the kneading, but if you use a mixer there's practically no work at all. And as you can see, it cuts beautifully. It's still slightly warm and ready to make your favourite sandwich, which leads me nicely into my next video. I hope you watch how I make my favourite sandwich, the BLT, using this very loaf I've just made. In the meantime, here's a selection of some of my other videos you may want to watch. Right, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and hopefully learned and taken something useful from it. Please like, share, comment and maybe subscribe by hitting the circle above. So until the next time, it's bye for now.